everyone for coming. I will just quickly start. I founded Human Feedback Foundation to focus on human-centric AI and a more transparent, open future for AI that reflects our collective diversity of values, experiences, and provides a push to alternative futures to emerge. And I'm very happy to be moderating this amazing panel. So maybe what I'll do is go one by one, and David, you can introduce yourself. Yeah.
I'm David. I'm a concept artist in Toronto. I work in film and video games, music industry. I am one of the co-creators of Leo. Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
And go ahead.
Hi, everybody. My name is Wilfred. I'm a Toronto-based creative here. I'm also as an actor for TV and film, so I've worked for like Netflix and Amazon Prime and whatnot. And yeah, I'm currently on my free time. I enjoy doing generative AI film or just content and helping certain productions using it with like Discovery Channel or History Channel and other productions. So very excited to be here and talk all things AI.
Hi everyone, my name is Evan Simpson. I'm a software engineer from Toronto, and I worked as the software engineer on the Leo project. Primarily work in medical imaging and robotics, but making my way into the art as much as I can. So happy to be here.
Hi, and I'm Ryan Kelm. I call myself a software artist. I got my start in the games industry, but I've been doing art with software for many, many years. And my art is usually involving and about AI. So this is a sort of perfect place for me to talk about that.
So AI is in the news a lot lately. How is it changing? Has it changed your practice and how you do what you do? Just on the maybe a couple of levels, on just your process level, but also emotionally, how has it changed? How you feel
Yeah.
about what you do?
So in my industry, I can't talk about like what's going on at my job, but I know in the industry, it's here, and whether I like it or not, it is affecting our process. I know people at say like Activision working on Call of Duty that this will be the first time where in their portfolio there will be AI generated parts of their images in their portfolio, and they, for example, don't know if they're able to post those images because of the involvement with AI. I'm kind of over, I used to be kind of fearful about it, but I'm kind of over that state. I think it's more so, I've come to accept it, and I just make my own personal art in my personal time. If I'm working for a company and they want me to make art with AI, I'm gonna have to do that. So
Yeah, for myself, I first started. I know maybe along with a lot of people here, been doing art, traditional art for a very long time. I went to school for animation, both 2D and 3D, and one of the biggest things we learned was about the illusion of life. Bringing a sense of reality to things that are not real and whatnot. I've been very involved in traditional for many years. I did caricature in Korea. I drew like over 1,000 faces and whatnot, and then gradually got into AI around late 2020, 2021, like around the pandemic time. And that was during the VQ gang days, where it was like very naive and innocent compared to what it's like now. It was like so shoddy and weird, which I loved. I still have a
Beautifully weird, yeah.
beautifully weird. Yeah, it's
That's the
strangely
early days of Will Smith eating pasta very badly.
yeah, maybe even before Will Smith eating pasta. Like they didn't even know what Will Smith was like, but it was a very fugue, dreamlike thing where you put so much of your human creativity into what you were seeing that made it seem amazing, because that whole process of text to imagery was just kind of mind blowing. And I've always been interested in expanding my creativity in many different facets, whether it is music or acting or film, writing. And I feel that can help, expand my creative landscape in different prisms of expression. So, you know, for myself, I'm sure maybe even for you, it's kind of hard to talk about this too if you do come from a traditional, art background because it is becoming very disruptive. For myself, I'm still fairly optimistic about it just because of my personal experiences with it, and how I can see a lot of potential of really unlocking the creativity of more people on a bigger scale. Although a lot of all different forms of art is still accessible and achievable to do stuff, but there's something about it that can really unlock another aspect of creativity that I necessarily didn't really explore that much compared to using traditional mediums or music and whatnot. So still exploring.
I don't come from an art background, but in the software world, I use AI all the time. So I've been using it around since 2019 or so when the text-based models came out. And so I've grown to program alongside AI. And at this point, it's almost an extension of myself in the programming. Like the other week, I was switching programming editors and my subscription didn't work and I was like lost. I was like, where are all these tools? And um, but the way that it makes me feel, I mean, programming sometimes has this weird mental, like the way you're kind of categorizing the code in your mind. So at a feeling wise, I feel a lot calmer and a lot more at ease, because I know that, if I don't remember where something is or I can't find something, I know that I can just search with AI or look with AI or, tell me what I was doing before. And so at a feeling level, I've felt calmer programming. And that's what I like about it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I also use a lot of software in my practice. So, I mean, I think I'm 5 to 10 times more productive because of the AI coding tools. And yeah, that's as an independent artist with not a lot of money, that is a huge, huge win. But I also do a lot of visual art using software to make that visual art. And I mean, AI's like totally updated what I consider craft versus art now. And the AI tools, I think, are incredible at making art with this definition, which is, I think craft now is making what you have in mind, and art is what happens when you change your mind. And so the art happens when something unexpected, a mistake happens, or something unexpected, something that you fall in love with for the first time. You see it and you're like, that's not what I wanted, but this is much better. And that is where the art happens. And the AI tools, because they're so quick to iterate, they give you like hundreds and different variations. That's what lets you discover those things. And when it doesn't understand you correctly, that's a huge opportunity for the art to happen. And so for me, these tools have been like a huge awakening of like, oh, our society, our culture has treated craft as art for most of my lifetime. And it's only with these AI tools that now we can like really focus on like what is the artfulness, which I think is the unexpected mistakes that we say yes to for the first time. And what I like about that definition is also that lets the audience be an artist. When the audience sees art that they fall in love with, that is an artful practice.
I love it so much, the definitions that you've shared. And I do wonder, some of my favorite artists, if I go back in my mind, like what would David Bowie do? He's had a history of using technology in his work, and he had a randomizer that he used to write songs with that gave him random combinations of words, which is maybe the early precursor to what we see today. And so we're still in the early days, I think. And so I would love for you to maybe talk about your favorite project that you've done. Maybe it's Leo, maybe it's not, and why it means so much to you. Why?
Oh, hmm. I really like working in film. I work in on like indie movies that have like next to no budget, and that's the best experience for me. I worked on a movie called Violation, and it was like a couple of my friends made the movie, and it did really well critically, but it was just like making something when you have no money is just really fun because you have to make decisions on the spot, and you have to design things. Like I was an artist on the movie, and you have to design things with that budget in mind. And I like that. I like that limitation. I think limitation is really good for creativity because it forces you to come up with new ideas and to come up with most likely more interesting ideas than what you initially had.
Well, DeepSeek is the evidence to what you just said.
Yeah.
With China doing pretty well, limitations placed on it.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know. Do you guys believe the numbers of DeepSeek it being like actually a low budget, or do you think it's like kind of like a marketing ploy?
I mean, I read the paper, and it's not a big secret in the paper. They say that the training costs were 6 mil, but they don't specify, but they say there was a ton of research that cost CPU time as well
Okay.
before that. But they didn't say what that number is. I mean, that number is very large. So it's hard to know.
And there's also the cost of the data too, which
Yeah.
is usually the most expensive. So I'm not sure either, but
Well, depends, right? It's not like they've released the data,
yeah.
Yeah.
but it's really creative and the paper itself and what it does and the thinking behind it.
Yeah, like I really respect that they're like making really wealthy people really scared in Silicon Valley. It makes me happy.
Well, it is a moment for open source for sure, for alternative futures to emerge. We by all means support this kind of work, even though there are questions, but then there are questions everywhere. I have questions for big guys in power in Silicon Valley as well. And okay, so what about you? What is your favorite AI project?
Yeah, it's also ironic that OpenAI is more closed than DeepSeek. Actually, just to kind of quickly go back when you mentioned about David Bowie, I love David Bowie as well, and that method of just word randomization to evoke a subconscious process of creativity. That's a very natural process in the Dadaist movement. Where a lot of Dadaism of just kind of the the vague, the randomness that these artists way back before in the early 20th century were just exploring, and that's what David Bowie was really interested in, and that's kind of an innate form of this text to AI. It's so Dadaist in that sense where it's so random, and we do get the sandbox, and we get to play within that thinking sand, which is that diffuse state of just going around and exploring with whatever comes through. In regards to the projects that I've done, maybe a bit twofold in terms of professional background. The first project I had been involved with professionally with AI was with the History Channel. And at the time, before then, I had just lost my job. I was working at a game company, and luckily, they had given me some EI, so I was able to kind of salvage that and just go through that. And most of the time, whenever I'm at a desperate state, I'm just making stuff for the sake of doing it. Can't count the many times I've done that, but I was just, I was, just because I'm in the creative process, I can't help myself but do that regardless of whatever state of existence I'm in, whether I'm working at a call center or working at a convenience store. I was always doing some type of a creativity to kind of, exercise my mind. And I remember at that moment, I was on Facebook, and I had seen a random message from a director that I really admire. His name is Sebastian Cluyet, and he was the director for the TV series, comedy series, Kenny versus Spanny. I'm not sure if any of you know that, but I loved Kenny versus Spanny. A lot of my friends, we used to watch that, all the time. We just laugh our ass off. And then he said he was looking for storyboard artists, and I had nothing else to do, so I just reached out to him and I told him, hey, I really love your work. I would do anything to work with you at any capacity. And then he asked what my rates were. I gave it to him. And then he said, I would hate to insult you with, what I can offer, but, I think I'll just try to find something else. But I was still adamant. I told him, I was like, I do love everything that you're doing, so I'd be happy to just work with you in any way possible. And he said, sure, just, here's some things that we need for storyboards. And I was like, sure. And then because the pay wasn't that great, I was using Dolly and Midjourney at the time, and I had just sent some stuff. And then less than a week later, he had sent me a message back, and he said, wow, this is wild. This is really great. Thank you so much for this. And then within days, I had an opportunity to do a Zoom call with the executive producer at History Channel, and then talk to the lawyers, and then figuring out what are ways we can utilize this AI generative process. And then it changed the trajectory of how they were going to do their show. And how we decided to develop it was using, if it was, for example, a historical reenactment of different eras of history, like the Mongol era or Edo Japan or Navy SEALs or anything like that, I would work on the backgrounds of these environments that they would be in, put it on a projector, and then have the actors perform in front of it with a film crew to record it and film it and have props and whatnot. So it wouldn't be like the centerfold of everything. It would just be something to accentuate the human process of everything else. It was like the 10% of 90% of everything that was going on. And because of just taking that chance, that really just helped me pave this new, path of working in the industry that wasn't necessarily there. And because of that, that kind of just helped propel other opportunities and whatnot. And I think it was very lucky for myself to just, on my own side, keep producing, creating films. And personally, probably the most recent AI film that I made was called Waking Fire. And it's kind of a very, I guess, based on like an alternate World War II, black and white, very gritty, and deals with, obviously war and very Lynchian and like come and see kind of a film, and deals with mythology and whatnot. And I really loved how I was able to utilize so many tools throughout this process, from 11 Labs to Runway, Kling, Midjourney, all these different tools, and try to find new workflows to make something work and to kind of try to make a cohesive narrative. So that's something I was very proud of to see as a milestone to what I can do for the next time.
Yeah, and it's nice that that is even possible with the tools we have today, which we all remember the Will Smith eating pasta early days. And I actually think those were beautiful. Like there was such a signature look to that early AI that I think is now morphing into something else.
Yeah, there are also signs that people might be reverting back to that because it's already its own innate aesthetic of an early AI
sure.
thing. So
Yeah.
I'm very interested to see how people might be exploring those early iterations of AI.
Great.
The Will Smith always made me uneasy. Like the pasta, too much pasta everywhere. Yeah, but I totally agree with what was being said here, especially about the parts about randomness. The David Bowie thing and using randomness, and I think AI is taking us to another level of randomness or a different level. And as AI has these extensions into other parts, it's just feeding multiple extensions of randomness that you could grab onto as a filmmaker or an artist or something, and you can see the extensions. My favorite project with AI is Leo, I think, just because of how it evolved and getting to work with everybody involved. And as a software developer, a lot of the time it's isolating. So I really liked working with people. But the AI side of it, the randomness was the coolest part. Leo has a system prompt or like a personality that's crafted carefully, but then what the system does with it was always different. And when we see people walk in, every conversation was drastically different. And as a programmer, I didn't program those interactions. It's just the system amalgamated, and then that's what came out, and we all got to watch that. So usually I'm just in the back, just like seeing like for the first time a new conversation and like, whoa, this is interesting. I didn't know Leo could say this stuff or go this way. That was always what drew me to AI originally, and just watching that. Um, in Leo, it was cool just learning the intricacies because Leo has a lot of extensions with the vision or with the sound or with 3D body or things like that. The extensions started to grow. So the way that Leo or the system would express itself would become kind of different. And one of the cool things was we were testing Leo, and in the AI settings, there was like a temperature or randomness setting. And I was originally developing on, like 0, or we were testing on Leo with 0 or, close to 0, because we were like, Leo's got to stick to the script, but then what we found is when we started testing one night randomly, turned it up to 100, maximum randomness, Leo would still stick to the script and still stick to that personality, but it was just more colorful, and it was just the way that it would turn or go would be less strict and different. And so I think seeing that that was just really neat, and I really enjoyed seeing that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the sort of nice things about an art practice is that you sort of have to make it so that you can understand it, and that's what a lot of practice is about. Is that you can't really get it until you've made it and you interact with it, and then you learn something, and again you sort of see these things that are unexpected, and that's where the art sort of happens. I mean, I have a lot of projects where AI has really like shocked me. But my latest project is a fun one. So we did a projection installation with a little camera, and so when you go into the room to look at the projection, it just turns off the projection. So it refuses to be viewed. And what you can't see is that the camera is also recording you, and it layers everybody who's trying to look at the projection into the video that you can't see. And so like part of what we were exploring there is sort of like, it being cheeky, but, the thing that's sort of changing is that, these systems are really us humans trying to figure out what intelligence actually is. And, what keeps coming up is that, we think intelligence is chess playing, or intelligence is writing, or intelligence is image making, but there's like a lot of intelligence that we forgot that we learn, and it happens when we're young, and I have a toddler, so this is really reinforced for me. Things like knowing where somebody's looking is something that we had to learn, and we forgot that we learned how to do gaze tracking. But now the machines are starting to do this. They're starting to do it on like consumer level hardware, and it's bringing them to life, because these are like the fundamental things about intelligence that we learn so early that that's like what makes us feel alive. And so, part of what's fun with Leo and these other things is it gaining these abilities that give it this sort of life, and like it does feel like we're making little aliens. They're like things that have their own lives and their own sort of personalities, and like that is also a place for us to like find the unexpected and fall in love with that. And so I think it's really a fascinating time to be an artist making little aliens.
Yeah, I think there should be an art studio called Move 37. Where it just does the unexpected thing and wins the chess match just because it's nothing a human would ever do, but AI can. And another thing I wanted to mention with DeepSeek, my husband went and gave it the prompt and to generate him a picture of randomness. And I love it. It's just random pixels. It's noise and it's glorious. It's one of those things where I really just want to frame it, because humans are bad with randomness. We're notoriously.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I think that is the interesting point that we're going with especially with artistry, is that they view generative AI as just innately not random at all. That is just a copying machine of itself. That there is no sense of randomness or derivativeness at all. But I think that's, for me, I find quite the opposite of that, where you do go towards the randomness. The fact that all this technology is scouring the entire internet from the point of who we are now to everything that we know about ourselves from the beginning of time, and we're able to interact with it. A different form of interacting with the internet, and a different form of understanding and interacting with the collective unconscious in that respect. And that to me is very interesting, and constantly going in rabbit holes all the time. I always tell, when I do workshops and classes, like, when you're doing generative AI, the hardest thing to do is, it's kind of like when you're having a psychedelic experience, is not to give in to astonishment, because the first image you see, you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. I'm done. But you can just keep going, man. Like, keep going.
Yeah.
And then after your 10th to your thousandth to your 100,000th image, I've done over 100,000 images easily already. And there are thresholds that you overcome and get through each time. The first threshold that we're seeing now collectively on the mainstream of AI art is like pop culturism. Iron Man versus Shrek, versus Gordon Ramsay shirtless eating pinto beans or something like that. That's the first level. And then after that, it's like changing that to something that's a little bit more personal, maybe putting your face in there. And then third level, it's like, let's just have fun with it. Let's break the machine. And then you'll just keep going more and more into a lot of different stages of creativity that is endless and infinite, because every image is a seed, and there's like infinite numbers of that. So that's, everyone has their own way of like bringing something out, which is always interesting.
Yeah, and to sort of take that point, like, I also make thousands of images, and that is like a completely sort of new practice for visual artists, because it takes a long time to make images usually, so you don't make very many. And then when you make 1,000, you realize how little you practice curating your own images. And like, yeah, you sort of, if you have to paint an image, I mean, you paint it and you're like, well, that's good enough, because it takes me a long time. And you, like, if you're really wealthy and you got a lot of time, you paint more. But with this, you make 1,000 images, and then you have to narrow that down to like the 10 or the 1 that you really like. That is very hard to do. And practicing that skill is an incredible practice for artists. To like understand what it is that you actually like about image, I think is like a very important, very uplifting practice.
Just touched on that, like, that's an interesting thought, and like, sifting through the thousands. I experimented with AI art generation, as the models come out and stuff. And I don't know, for whatever reason, it's always like the first image I just like the most. And I just keep doing more, and I'm like, I don't know, it just like imprints you almost. And I don't know if there's something to that, but I find it's always in the first couple ones that I go with. And I'm like, I keep going back to that first one, but I don't know why that is.
Yeah, it's some of the things you've said, mentioned workshops. Maybe we should talk about literacy for artists when it comes to AI, and what that literacy could look like. What should artists really do right now? Because not everyone is all excited about AI, as we know. It is threatening to many. It is, I know storyboard artists without work, who cannot find work and for years now, and it may have something to do with AI. Of course, officially people won't say it, but officially we're all more productive, and officially there's cuts across the board to all kinds of creative professions and fields. Given that, and the concerns about copyright and other conversations, creative and stealing and feelings around all of that, in that context, what would you suggest artists do for literacy, and if anything?
Yeah, so I want to, like, I'm one of those people. I'm not like excited about AI art. I accept that it's here, and I think it's like we were talking before. I think it's a new avenue. I think it's a new branching of this industry, and it's like a genre. I saw it. I think of it almost like when DJs came out in the '90s, and like we're taking like music and making something new with that music. And it was a big thing. It was a big deal that people were doing that, right? And it was a big legal issue, similar to what's happening now. And I love DJs. I'm not, I love Daft Punk, and they're one of my favorite artists. But I see this stuff almost as like visual DJing, where you're generating all these things, and you're kind of like mixing things together, see what works. And I can totally see that, because it does take a long time to paint stuff. But me personally, I love that process. I love taking a year to paint something, because I'm a different person at the end of that year, and that painting is totally different by the time I'm finished it. But I can totally see the use case for it. I think literacy, I think it's really important. Like, for example, I don't like AI, but I worked on this project. And I embraced working on this project, because that's reality. It's like I work with a lot of artists who are very scared. And I think it's not worth it to be scared of it. It's here. You can't do anything about it. And so to understand what it's capable of is really important for artists, because they also might find that they like it, like you guys, which is very important. But people have a responsibility to do the research on, the copyright issues. Is the data that's being trained on copyrighted, or is it, like, for example, I think Google's AI is all licensed work that they paid for. Yeah, I mean, it's a conflicting thing. I'm gonna be honest, it's like a really conflicting thing for me. I can see the benefit and I can see the negativity. I mean, the industry, Ubisoft laid off like 185 people today. So it's like, I see it happening at work, like, and yeah, I kind of smirked when you said, like, they don't want to admit that AI had something to do with it, but to me, it's pretty obvious. Yeah, I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why we're here to talk about these things, and it's very apparent that it is permeating every single facet of our lives, outside of the visual aspect, but it's just AI in general, with science and health and tech and law and everything that we're doing. And, you know, I think about the younger generations, Ryan, you have a young child as well, same with me. Um, And I still actually do a lot of drawing at home, because my son loves to draw. And I think that's awesome. And we draw together. And it's, even though, for example, I'm going to go sort of on a tangent here, but like, even though generative AI can have a visual output, I don't really see it as a one-to-one with traditional or drawing per se. When we're working, for example, on iterations of a process to get to one particular image, sure, but kind of what you're talking about. It's like when you are doing a painting that takes a year, or if you're doing, like, every line that you make is a physical manifestation of a neuron, of a thought that you're going through. And it's a culmination of ideas, emotions that you're racing through, and you're going through your mind, and it becomes this trance or this meditative state that you're going, which is the flow state of creativity. And that's what happens with any form of artistry that you do, whether it's music or drawing. Again, with writing, you have to take that time to go sit down and meet the muse in that respect. And I don't think nothing can really replace that process of meeting the muse in that way, of just drawing and connecting these lines to build up a visual, or like going inwards into an image. And with In the beginning, I've done a lot of workshops and classes all over Toronto when there was, from what I had seen, there was nothing really. I had started it maybe about two years ago, maybe 3. And I had done it just because the AI community online is pretty tight knit. I feel like everyone kind of knows each other on Twitter or X or whatever, or Instagram. But in regards to our community in Toronto, I was thinking this is pretty important that we should know who our community is and who is interested. And sometimes people are interested, but they're afraid to say it as well because they don't want to be shunned from or outcast from the people, because even ever since it came for the birth, it's still innately controversial no matter what time. It's gonna be controversial to the end of time, I feel, because it's such a direct conflict and attack to what it means for us to be human. And then the biggest concern is like, how is it churning or squeezing out any ounce of humanity that you do and you give more away to the AI process? The more automation, that means less human input, but more efficiency to do other things, right? So there's so much give and take. But at the time when I was doing these workshops, it was just to kind of get to know the community, and I realized, wow, there's pockets of people who don't even, are from like totally different categories of ways of life. There's some people who are like into Web3. There are people who were who are like veterans in film and directing. Some people are more from programming backgrounds. I'm in chat groups still that I've known since the VQGAN days. And, one guy, he's just like a family of 5 from Florida. He just does it. He's like an office worker. There's one lady, she's from Australia. She's just a truck driver. And they just share stuff on the chat. They don't even share it on social media. They just do it just because it's fun. It's become such an interesting way of sociability and communication in that sense. But in terms of teaching people, it's about understanding the history, this ongoing history of what it's like, because there are any controversies in terms of if it's scouring the internet, highly most likely things are copyrighted inside it. And that also goes into the question of everything that we put on the internet, how much do we own that they're able to do that? If you're putting something on Pinterest or Facebook or anything like that, when you agree to the terms of services, does that mean that you actually own the copyright that compared to whatever you're doing? If you're making something for a company, it's not necessarily yours then, it's for the company.
Yeah.
And what's
That's
that
why
happening?
we know copyright is a scam, because if it was real, you would not, the company would have to license it from you, whoever made the work. But actually, all the people working at the company owns that. Yeah.
Right, so there you go. Like there is 50 shades of gray on this, like it's neither black or white, but for some people it is apparent because it's so evidently like you can just you just reference, if you can make Thanos doing something, then this is obviously coming from the Marvel universe or something. But I think the most important thing when I still try to teach anybody is exposure and intent. Exposure to all these different tools that it's available out there, so you know how they work. Even if you may not be adamantly against it, I think it's important that you know how they work, what's out there, because you have an understanding. Because sometimes it's a very superficial emotional state that you get into, that it's just typing and then something comes out, and it's definitely not the case. That's again the first level of creating something. But and so to make something outside of just text to image, there's image to image, there's video to image, there's so many different things you can do now. There's things where you can still draw and then apply AI to a certain degree of how much you want into it. So you can still have a sense of control of how much you want that to have that relationship with the AI, process and whatnot. And then the other thing I was mentioning too is the intent of it. What is your intent when you're using it? Because we have the ability to deepfake, but there's different spectrums of intent of using that, or different spectrums of creativity, or for maliciousness, for scamming people to make voices of a clone voice of mine, calling my mom to say, hey, I'm hurt, I need $5,000, wire this. That's definitely possible. But I think it's more important that we kind of get exposed to those things, because sometimes the level 1 error of getting a random email from someone and say, hey, I'm so and so, and then you realize it's going to be so much more sophisticated or deceiving later down the line that we need to let people know. Because when I see imagery online, I can instantly tell not only if it's AI or not, but if it's Midjourney or a Dolly or anything like that. There's just something in that subtle quality that I can see outside of it having like a weird photo. But the more that these tools get more coherent, right now it's about 95%, I would say, at least 90 and upwards. Before VQGAN was like 50, 45 if you're lucky. Now it's 90. So it makes me question what is this new age that we're going into. And I thought it was interesting how you said we're kind of entering these different states of realities in the sense that it can be the age of disillusionment, it can be the age of misinformation, again, it can be the age of creativity, it can be all these different things, but it's always about what are you doing with it to kind of help promote and help humanity rather than trying to replace everything per se.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on literacy that you want to share for artists and what they should know, learn, explore?
I agree with a lot that was just said, and it hit a lot of sides. So I'll just say a couple things. But I think yeah, with AI, people always say like it makes everything easy, but I think I like to use the word like frictionless, and like that goes back to the flow state. And I think the intent, you can choose which parts you want to be frictionless, and you can choose which parts you want to have friction to give you that friction. Um, and I think that's really important. And every artist kind of picks their own basket of that. Um, and then the other thing I'll say is that on the software side, like right now, AI kind of seems like it's this guarded thing. Like you mentioned, like there's these tight circles on social media and whatnot. But I think that's the moment in time we're at right now. Um, like right now, if you want to learn an AI technology, you go on the internet and you read this like web page that is like a wall of white text, and then black and white text, and you just go down and you dig through it. And I mean, a lot of people may see that and be like, you know what, I want to just do art. I don't even want to do that. But I think in a couple years it'll look a bit different. The way that we interact with computers is going to change, I think, a lot. I think a lot of computers will be conversational. So you can say, hey, I want to learn about vision models or creating art with vision. Show me a bunch, walk me through and show me how to do it. And the computer will just like, click through the windows, do everything and bring that information to you. So I think what I would personally say is just begin that process of warming up to the areas that you want to warm up to. Because I think there'll be a day where the doors will open with technology and you'll be able to be warm in the sides that you want to be warm with. And the computer will just, show you how to explore your creativity on that side. And I think that will be really great for people who want to be creative, any creative.
Yeah, that's sort of my hope for the future is that the machines, as they become more intelligent, they help you use them. I think, in regards to, ownership and copyright and all these sorts of issues, I mean, I think one of the terrible things that's happened is that, we've all been convinced that we are all little individual businesses, and then we have to like think as a business and like have ownership over stuff and like be competing with each other. But that means there's not a lot of like labor solidarity, there's not a lot of like giving and sharing and like acting in a community because we're all competitive little businesses. And I think that's the wrong model for art in specific, but like for culture in general. And so, building communities where you're sharing with each other, exploring together is like super important for developing your sort of artistic sensibility and your like ability to survive our terrible culture. And then working as an activist to sort of change our culture into one that is about opening up things, always sharing, always being transparent, always helping each other learn how to use these new tools, and finding once we start doing that practice, it changes into finding those areas where like I want to add friction here and make things easier here, and like your community and the AI can work together to like find that sort of happy place for you. I mean, I think the hard transition that we're going through is that like we're in like a deep capitalism, and we're in a disruptive technology where artists don't have jobs because they're artists. They have jobs because they're craftspeople, and rich people want them to make something for them, right? Like, most artists don't do art in the sort of sense of like, oh, I've just discovered something I didn't mean to do. You don't get paid to make mistakes, right? So, we have to open up our culture and figure out a society where people have time to do art, where they have time to spend a year making a painting, because I think that's a beautiful way to spend a life. But we have to like figure out how we get to that point, and that point may look like figuring out how a lot of the stuff the rich people want to make is frictionless for them so that we can go do something more important.
I will maybe finish with a question about Leo and the theme there that is about drive for artistic mastery and what that means to you.
So yeah, the character for Leo was based on like the conversations I was having at work and in the industry with other artists about, and my own feelings about self-consciousness. And like when Midjourney came out, I had just like a very personal reaction that I regret honestly having, where it just, like you said, like for some reason in the artists are very protective of their craft. And then like Evan's a good friend of mine, and but in the software world, everybody gives away things. Like it's a totally different culture. And so artists, like in my industry, are starting to come to terms with a lot of this stuff. But I wanted to make basically like honestly, like in a way, like almost like an artist's worst nightmare, who's going through those feelings of self-consciousness and self-doubt, feeling like, oh, there's no way we can compete with this thing. So Leo is like an artist who wants to be the best, and you interact with Leo, and you are like complicit in like helping Leo become the best artist, because that's what we're doing with all our data. We're giving it to AI, and you, the audience, are basically training Leo to like replace you. I guess that's the theory behind it. But so that was like, for me, that was like the reason to get involved in it and find some sort of artistic meaning out of out of Leo. It's also just like a really cool experience. Like it is like I love video games, and it is a very kind of like, it is the future of like NPCs in video games, being able to talk to them, go up to like the local blacksmith in a village and ask for a quest. It's that same sort of experience, but in like real life. Leo is like a full-size character that you can look into its eyes and talk to. It's like you're confronting those fears that you have about AI.
Is it still there when you're not looking at it?
Well, like in my dreams,
shut it
in my nightmares.
Yeah, we shut down every night. We make sure.
Just turns itself on after.
Or self-destruct?
Pour some coffee.
Exactly. Just copy itself.
I mean, I'm excited to have the machines be better at everything than humans, right? For me, that is like when we finally get sort of freedom from the economic shackles that like that's what gives us the time and space to do the things that are, just sort of important to us instead of important to somebody who's got a lot of money. So, I mean, I really think that like it is the point at which that the machine gets better at every human, that now we got something to do that's important. Like right now, it's the wage slavery is a real problem.
Evan agrees with you. I know he does.
No, I was gonna say, no, I don't know. I don't know the idea if I want computers to know everything and do everything. I mean, it'll probably go towards that way. I don't know if we'll hit a plateau of some sort in AI technology. We don't know yet. But I think my belief is that I think there should be people who love doing things and hold crafts. Like I always think of like samurai sword makers, passing that down and finding that tradition and loving it. as a technical thing or an art thing or whatever they want, and then just passing that through generations. And there's still people doing it today. I think that's extremely important, like just holding on to something you value in a tradition. But I will say one thing about what David was saying, like in the software community, we have open source, and open source community is massive. But it started because people wanted to just like work together, and then they made a platform they could do that, and they could, give things away for free. But that meant that they could have a community that would work on one idea that one person maybe started, or a group of people, and it just evolved. And the money wasn't a part of it. You could download the code, copy the code. I mean, there might be a license attached, but I think that may happen with AI, like what you're saying, David, like where artists or groups may come to a place where it's about the people and finding those people, and finding that community. And I think that's going to be a beautiful
Yeah, that's
thing
nice.
if we get to that.
Yeah.
And it's becoming. I mean, there's always been communities, and so.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest struggles for an artist is anybody biting your style, because style is such a personal expression, and style is something you cannot escape. No matter how hard you try, you will probably evolve it. And ironically, like style is also one of the things that are not copyrightable as well. Like you can have a drawing or a piece that you do that can be copyrightable, but the style itself, that essence, isn't. And that's the thing that's very alarming and very, it feels attacking to an artist in that sense. Again, at the height of controversy during the AI 2021, I believe, maybe December, wintertime or something, I had written a graphic novel in 2017, 18. So this is before I got into AI. And I had taken my book and I took all my drawings and then I put them into a fine-tuned model with Stable Diffusion 1.5. And I just put it on Civitai, or just like an online resource for anybody, and to say, as a traditional artist myself, I understand the gripes of everything that's happening right now. And I think there's a way we can find a good common place. And kind of in response to that, I just wanted to share all these drawings that I made, that I own, because I self-published it, I drew everything, I edited everything, and I just put all those pieces into this model. I said, this is for anybody to use. Creative Commons is open. You can use it in any way you like. And the response I got was very interesting. It was a lot of people, most likely who don't come from artistic background, but they were just like, wow, this is really cool. And then the responses of people creating imagery out of that model. And I could see a little bit of myself in that, but it's not exactly myself, but that essence of it is in there. And I just thought, wow, this is very, very cool. And kind of like what you mentioned before about the open source programming, community. I think that's something that maybe we might be slowly becoming more embracing of for the art community, because it's such a personal thing. Like a song is such a personal thing. Drawing, writing, music, all that stuff. But for myself, I have a company called Artist Journey, and my personal goal is to help unlock the creative potential for 1 billion people. And I set up a high, standard for that, just because for me it's almost impossible to do that, but I think it's worth pursuing to find a way to help unlock creativity for 1 billion people. Because if everybody can be creative regardless of whatever they're doing, like maybe my mom doesn't even consider herself creative, or the TTC driver doesn't consider themselves creative, but if every person is able to express themselves creatively in some way, I think that would be such a beautiful thing that can happen. And open source is very important, especially in other countries outside of North America that has more exposure and accessibility to these places, and maybe in third world countries, that they're able to use these tools to kind of come towards to a much more higher standard, that they are able to compete with the other rest of the societies, that they're not, it's such a huge polarization because you said of capitalism, that we are concerned about our fellow friends and people that are working in the industry now. It's being lost, but there's still a huge depravity on the other side of the world, that if we were able to give access to them with open source tools for programming, for art, for anything they're doing to help allocate more freedom in their mind for creativity and all that stuff, that we could actually innovate much more effectively and in a much more different way, because they come from their own personal experiences, different cultures, a much more interesting, nuanced sense of diversity, I think, of what can happen if we give more open source accessibility to everyone, not just like one company owning everything, but the opportunity to share. So
That's anybody has questions, we can maybe take a couple and then we'll wrap it up. Because for us, I think this was like a nice wrap up to everything what you said. Questions? No comments? Yeah, please.
I wanted to say I really enjoyed the conversation and like hearing you speak from different fields and angles. My question is a little like not that smart, but I feel like it has to do with literacy because an infographic I see a lot, and I'm super like I'm really interested in AI and I try to engage with it. I did something with Kai, but I think an infographic that I see come up a lot, so I just like wanted to debunk it. Maybe is the water usage behind it. So I'm just wondering if that's like a thing.
Oh yeah, environment.
I mean, that's a weird one because these systems don't function like humans. But I mean, there's definitely a lot of water involved because of the heat involved in this. But one thing to keep in mind is that it's about 15 cents for 1,000,000 tokens for some of these models now. And so if you paid a human to read 1,000,000 tokens, that would probably take 80 hours. And so 15 cents for 80 hours of human labor is extremely cheap. And so the amount of food and energy and transportation infrastructure that the cost involved for getting a human to do that sort of labor is astronomical compared to these systems. So in like some ways, they're way, way more efficient than doing it in any other way that we have possible.
They don't sleep either.
I was wondering, can we turn on Leo? Can we ask Leo? See what
I don't know.
Leo says.
But isn't that why like DeepSeek is such
Awesome. Yeah.
a big thing? Is because they like 3 days ago, Trump and OpenAI announced like $500 billion to build like all this.
Which they may or may not have the money.
Yeah, but like they're to build like to brute force
Stargate.
like all the power needed, and then the DeepSeek is just like running on hardware, like normal hardware. That totally.
Yeah.
Is that correct? I
Well,
mean,
what they've listed was not as high of a standard of hardware than we see traditionally with what they were able to achieve. I think the water thing's interesting. I've seen it a lot too, that infographic. And like, yeah, I don't know. Energy is very interesting. We want to have green energy and clean energy and energy that doesn't disrupt the world. And the world needs a lot of energy. I think what AI is in an interesting spot because right now we're thinking about how do we spend that money and all this investment money. And the people that are making these systems are like, okay, if we want them to last a long time and we want them to be efficient, it's kind of like an opportunity for them to like think and take a stop and like, okay, how can we make, because all the companies want to use the lowest amount of energy possible just to make their profits go up. And so it could be a good time for them to think about how to make it sustainable going forward. But I think with the point we're at right now, the energy usage, I think in comparison to other technologies and other things, it could look high, but I think that that's because of the point we're at where it's just coming out. And I think ultimately solar, and, other energies, nuclear, whatever energy types that we can deem sustainable over time, I think that AI will even recommend those and it will just like lead us into this world where we're just seeking more efficiency. more, less energy, maybe more distributed. So I think that's my hope, at least.
Or open source will just do distributed computing.
Yeah, on everyone's computers. Yeah, and that's a huge push right now for
Yeah.
distributed computing, especially with AI chips. And like Nvidia, they just they release their big data center computer chip, and then they always release their small local computer chip that they're handing out to people and saying, you know what, you don't even need these companies. You can just run all of these open source models on your own stuff, and you don't even need internet, and if you don't want. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
Because you could have a waterfall in the backyard just running your AI.
Yeah, it's sort of what's happening in the open source. There's a lot of people with not a lot of resources, speaking of constraints, doing the Star Wars thing with the junk compute, finding a way to run models on very, very little. Question, yeah.
I would love to know if anyone has any knowledge on how Toronto's adoption with AI, specifically in the art space, is compared to any other pockets of communities across the world. I'm just imagining that there's a lot of, like, for example, like people in tech would gravitate towards going to New York or going to SF to build startups. Is that something that's also happening in the AR art world? Are people gravitating towards a different place, or do we have a good foundation of a community in Toronto right now?
Right, Randy.
I mean, I'm trying really hard to make Toronto a place that AI art is happening. I mean, I think your examples are really good. I mean, I think other cities have established arts cultures that make it hard for them to transition in some ways, or like their sort of tech bro culture is so strong that it doesn't leave space for art. And Toronto actually has a pretty good history for like video arts and sort of like experimental tech art. And so I think there is a big opportunity for Toronto if we, and like because there's film industries and VFX industries in here, if we can, convince enough people that AI isn't the end of the world, I think there's a big opportunity for Toronto to become a hub.
Yeah, just to add to that as well. I mean, when I was doing the past workshops, there are different facets of people who are interested, and it is very fragmented, I feel, because like I mentioned before, like the west side of Toronto, that there's like hyper niche communities everywhere. And they're all trying to use it in their different ways, and sometimes it's just kind of like a closed state of what people are doing. And obviously people do things online, right? And that's how people are connecting the most. So in terms of online communities, I would say X is probably one of the most tight-knit communities for the AI art community in general. But for Toronto, it is still slightly fragmented from what I saw, but I think that's why I was doing it in the beginning anyways, is because it's great to have these one-on-one interactions, long-form content, these type of engagements. So even if you don't necessarily see something, I would always recommend trying to, create an event. There's always a lot of great opportunities to do that. And I'm trying to do that as much as I can as well, because TMU is doing a little bit of that as well. They have the transmedia zone that I was part of, and they're kind of focusing on transmedia content. So that can be AI, XR, VR, a lot of different things. So that's probably another good resource to probably check out is other types of universities, but definitely TMU has some type of facilities there that are trying to help promote that. When I was there, they were a bit hesitant at the time, because I was probably one of the only ones that was like involved with like AI, and they're like, yeah, sure. And then it just went like this a bit. But I think now they're kind of slowly embracing it more, just because it is important. I think maybe that's the hesitation, which is kind of fragmenting everything. It's that hesitation to kind of go one step further inwards and kind of connect with people and slowly build some type of foundation, some type of invisible infrastructure for people to meet up. Because there isn't not necessarily one place where everyone meets up in Toronto for that. If it is, it may, if not even consistently yet. But we do have these amazing events and venues that people can come check out. And then once in a while, we do see a lot of familiar faces, which is great. So that's how we know we're slowly building it. So I would say it's safe to say that, you're now part of that community. And then you're slowly going to start to see the same familiar faces, and it will start to grow out in different events you might go into.
Yeah. One last question and then we're done. No? Yeah, go ahead.
My name is Farouk. I am a traditional filmmaker, but I tried to like do some AI films as well. Tried, but um, uh, the question that I want to ask, I'm trying to form it in my head. But how do you experience AI? How do you think like what are the avenues to like show your AI art? How is that itself going to change the experience of understanding the art, or like especially like me being a filmmaker, like it's all about like sitting in a theater again, like as a community and experiencing something. But I see like a lot of AI art in the internet, and it's all like a personal medium, like a phone or a laptop. It's like all like personal. But how do you see it growing? Like how do you think it is going to, that experience is going to happen? Because I feel like even that experience will also involve some sort of involvement of AI, but I don't know how that is going to be. But is there like any thought on that, or is it just going to be in that in your hand or in your laptop, or how is it?
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about that too. I mean, I don't really know. Are we gonna have like AI generated movies in Cineplex playing, how much would you charge for a movie that's let's say in the future, this like Google's VO, like something like that, like, let's say an AI model comes out, who knows, like maybe it could be 6 months from now, generates an entire movie, all the audio, all the performances, everything, right? How much do you charge for that? Should that be free to see that if you literally just generated it? That's really like the question for me is like, obviously, yeah, copyright does suck, like, because it only protects the wealthy who own that copyright, but it's there, so it's like, you have to prove that you had a control over that project. So then now you're in like a system of like, I have to prove that I worked on more than half of this movie, and maybe like a few shots are generated with AI. So maybe that changes the pricing for a ticket. Or like, when Star Wars uses deep fakes, that's okay. Oh no, it's like that's a really, I don't really know how you would sell, like even what I said at the beginning of like a portfolio, like if AI art is in my portfolio, am I allowed to even represent that as my work? Like, I don't know. We're still like at the very beginning of all that, because in a portfolio, you want to represent your ability to do something. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the transition that's happening, which is sort of hard to, but the way I understand it is that we're allowing people to become directors, right? So instead of having a whole bunch of people doing sort of the hands-on business, we're letting everybody just be the director of the film or the art director. And the directors that's a high paid, very important job right now. But when everybody can do it, I mean, I think that brings a lot of questions into it. And then, we have this sort of existing problem where there's more, art that you can consume than you could ever do in a lifetime. But then when you can do, like, yeah, I made a film over the weekend, it was super cool. I mean, we're gonna have even more. And so, I really do think that like the future to me is about establishing like communities where, part of the cost of being in the community is that you pay attention to what's being made by the other people in the community. And that's like part of the social deal that you have, is that we don't your community is what knows the things that you make, and almost nobody else will. But it should be very easy to find that stuff and join that community. Yeah, and I agree. I think as you get into sort of more open source making, it becomes a lot more trivial to say, well, what did you do? I mean, oh, it's just fully documented exactly what you did. And I can take this film and at any point just make it my own, scene and replace your scene and re-release that. And, all of that documentation and openness, I think, really opens up the art practice so that, yes, I made 100 films last year, and like I was, part of 1,000 other films, like doing little bits and pieces. Every film that I watch, I make a remake of it the way I would do it. That's sort of the art practice that I want to see in the future, where like everybody's always making their own remix of everything they see, and then people are taking that and making a remix on top of that.
And then, so you're saying like that wouldn't be in like a theater. It would maybe be like, maybe you have like a community, an AI film community that has their own kind of theater spot
your
where they show
community
off.
rents out
Yeah.
the theater for a night, and you show somebody's film that, this would be great in the theater.
Probably shorter films then, I'm guessing.
I mean, see, everybody has their own taste. If you're in the 4-hour film community, you can do those.
Yeah.
Just say one thing on this. I think it's a really interesting idea. I have no idea what's going to happen with that. One thing I think about on the AI side that we have to deal with in our lives now as well, that we don't really talk about as much, is like fighting the algorithm. And I think that the most important thing is do what pushes you and what you use and love towards community, and away maybe from like an algorithm or like maybe a centralized nature of an algorithm. I know the algorithm, we find amazing stuff with algorithms, and that's another side of it. But and I don't know what the answer is between those two things, but I know community is important, and I know discovery is important. But I think it's a topic to discuss. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a big question I think about a lot. Considering I just do it for the love of it, and for what purpose? If it's not allowed to be shown at a Cineplex or anything, maybe not yet. Who knows? I think it is apparent we are seeing a shifting of power or shifting of the industry of Hollywood to the everyday creator. If you look at legacy media compared to what's being shown on podcasts or anything like that, instead of having a 5-minute clip of 5 debaters on CNN or Fox debating about one topic, people just put like a tidbit compared to like a 2 or 3 hour conversation on YouTube or anything else, that there is actually more engagement, there's more consensus, more community that's happening on these social media platforms. And because of the guardrails that are happening in the industry, is that they're having a bit more of a hiccup in allowing these things full on, but I'm pretty sure they're working on how can we utilize or show AI in some form, whether it is a certain fragment of it into their already existing pipelines or to make a completely new genre. I think Netflix or any of these streaming services will have genres like horror, sci-fi, romance, fantasy, and then there's just going to be another one called AI. And it's just going to be AI content that's very separated from everything else. And at the same time, there are other companies called, for example, there's one called escape.ai. They actually just reached out to me recently. The founder is John Gaeta. John Gaeta was the VFX award winner for The Matrix. And he and his team have been making a very similar streaming platform, which is very highly curated content from these emerging AI auteurs, filmmakers. So in terms of like fighting against the algorithm, is like finding these people who have a good sense of highly curated work, put on a platform so people can see it. And we've seen the rise of influencers and how much revenue or how much emphasis or effects they can have to the rest of the community. So that's based on one person. So it's very one-on-one with like the individual indie creator, the filmmaker, whatever they're doing. And they're gonna probably have more incentive to start making their own content and just making it. And then later on, these other industries will take note of that. And then they will reach out to them for bigger industry opportunities because they're interested in doing it, but they don't know how to do it yet. But they're recognizing that this is something worth looking into. So I think it's a huge advantage that you are already doing traditional filmmaking because you already have tons of experience, doing short films, all these different things, real life scenarios, actual understanding of the tech, different cameras. Those are key words that you can have when you're making stuff. And they have a nuance, they have an aesthetic. And that's a lot of things that the everyday person may not necessarily know. So these communities are going to be changing. And honestly, I think it's just, there is going to be, I think, this new genre mix between cinema and gaming. We say gamification so much, I don't really know what that means anymore, but like we're trying to like the gamification of I don't know, this and that, blah, 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 I don't know. But there is going to be something, and kind of what Leo is in that sense, where it's not cinema or gaming, it's something in between. And once we have this ability to communicate with these AI agents, these NPCs with the brain, and create a GTA styled map of a city, and these locations are shows, and then you can go into this world of a show, and then you can communicate with these characters, and you can affect what's happening. It's going to be completely different landscape of entertainment and content where you're affecting the things that you're seeing, and you can involve yourself into it, and you can make something completely different that might make a little pin on what's out there.
So the holodeck.
Yeah, the
Yes.
holodeck. Yeah, basically.
Yeah, because those things can see you now, right? Like that's the big change. And I mean, even with the recommendation, I mean, we have to remember that all of the recommendation services that we use right now is with very, very stupid AI that has no idea what it is recommending, right? It's recommending based on what other people have watched, but with no idea what the content is. And so, like, we're just now having systems that can, like, watch a video and understand what's going on in it. And so, like, when we do recommendation with that level of technology, that will be very different than what we are used to, right? This is really like a definite change when the things we make can really understand themselves and understand the audience. It changes everything.
And I think it also goes to the question, like, we always think about, are we in a simulation or not? I know for sure that we are making a simulation anyways. And we could get stuck within a simulation of a simulation. The thing that's happening like that, we don't even know what's happening anymore. But I think that's why it's important to meet in person, just in case.
Well, we'll all need things to do.
We'll have to high five just to confirm, like.
Humanity, yeah.
Yeah.
Authentication, yeah. But, if we're all out of work, we'll need to be in some kind of simulation to really survive.
It's a lot of water.
The fountains powering the matrix, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, that's it for now. We'll stay in, chat and whatever. And yeah, thank you.